being released from the law is amazing, isn't it? Being released from the law, you're not under that law then. Not in the form of the letter. Just in the same way that if your spouse dies, you're not bound any longer. You're free to remarry, as you are also under certain conditions, namely the exception clauses, the desertion and the fornication clauses. You are not married. If those legitimate reasons occur for divorce, then you are not married. You're not just separate, you're not married. You're free to remarry. But even more so, of course, if your spouse dies, then you're absolutely free from that marriage obligation. If the Trinity had been listed in the New Testament, it would have required books and books of explanation. We know that Paul writes a massive stuff. The whole book of Hebrews, not by Paul, but the whole book of Hebrews, 2 Corinthians 3, the whole book of Galatians was written to deal with this very issue of moving from the Torah of Moses to the Torah of Messiah. Huge, radical thing. Not a word about now the one God has been changed into three. I mean, that's just outrageous, isn't it? There is some evidence from the rabbinical writings that they knew that when the Messiah came, he would do a new messianic Torah in some way. I don't think they knew exactly what that would imply, but as it turns out, exactly what Dan is saying there from Blanchard, I think, that the Torah then has been changed because Messiah has come. Then you can see that the break between us and Judaism is very strong here. Our Jewish friends out here who believe in the Torah and the Bible and second coming even of the Messiah, they absolutely cannot accept that Jesus that we think is the Messiah. They don't believe he really was the Messiah, mainly because he didn't set up the kingdom. So we're saying, well, he's going to do that at the second coming. That's the big divide then between Judaism and Christianity. And then he says that we're free from the law in verse 3. Free from the law. You're not bound by the Torah of Moses. So he says, in making an appeal to his brothers and sisters in verse 4, you were made to die to the Torah through the body. That would be the person of Christ. The word body can be misleading to our Western ears. It doesn't mean just the body and not the mind. It means the person, because in Romans 12, Paul says you're to offer your bodies a living sacrifice. It means your whole self. So we're now free from the law through the self that died, the Christ who died. And you do know, of course, that God cannot die. We mentioned that. One of your great reasons for pleading for the unity of God is that once you hear of somebody dying, you know he isn't God. That shouldn't be very hard. So through the body or self of Christ who died, so that you might be joined to another. Now that's then moving from being married to the law to being married to Christ. And you can develop that theme by saying that in the parable of the sower, that you're to bear fruit. And you can develop it in another way and say you are to bear fruit in the children that you convert too. The whole idea of the church being married to Christ is it produces its children. But often the church doesn't do much with that. And so we're all supposed to be active in some way, bearing fruit, not only the fruits of the Spirit in our life, but actually creating new family members through this process. So joined then, we're now married to Christ. You see, we were married to the law, now you're married to Christ as the bride in preparation for the Messianic banquet and all that. But verse 6 is triumphant. You've now been released from the Torah, having died. You're non-responsive to the Torah. You know, if somebody comes along and says, you should be keeping the Sabbath, keeping the holidays, it makes no impression on you. You're dead to that. No response. On the other hand, we're battling with people on the internet all the time who are lured into the Mosaic law. That's going to take you away from Christ and not towards Christ. People are trying to avoid this radical teaching, and you can always take them to the Colossians 2 passage where it says that the law of commandments in dogmas, actually Ephesians 2, Colossians 2, Ephesians 2, the law of commandments, the Torah of commandments in dogmas has been abolished. More specifically, we find that that's the part of the law which separates the Jew from the Gentile. You keep the Sabbath, it keeps you away from everybody. You insist on the food laws, you can't eat with a Gentile. Those parts of the law are now gone. That barrier has been undone, is it not? 2 Corinthians 3 is dramatic, where the Sinai event is said to be obsolete. That Sinai, can you believe the 10 Commandments? Nothing wrong with the 10 Commandments in principle, it's wonderful, as long as you realize that you're now to keep them in the spirit and not in the letter. Paul has to be very dramatic. He has to say, that's God. He even calls it bondage. Paul has to use every extreme argument to make his point. In Galatians 5, the whole book is dedicated to this subject. In Galatians 5, he says that the Sinai event is no better than Hagar. It's bondage. You want to go back to the 10 Commandments? Go for it. But you're going to take you away from Christ. That is, until you see that the Ten Commandments in the Spirit are fine, but not in the letter of the law. I love the text in Galatians where Paul says, if you're going to get physically circumcised, then watch out, you're going to have to keep the whole law. And I'm saying to people on the internet, what's that whole law which you shouldn't keep? Then in the same context as 5:3 of Galatians, he says, if I am still preaching circumcision and the whole law that goes with it, why in the world am I being persecuted? Paul has just finished saying, we're now joined, we were joined to the law, we were married to the law, now we're married to a spirit imparting power in heaven. You are actually linked to a life imparting spirit in heaven. If Jesus is keeping the new moons, go for it. I don't think he's troubled by the new moons. He's above all that, and so are you. Get real, join up to the power that is the powerhouse at the right hand of the Father.